Welcome to SIGHTLINE Live, the podcast where we explore how live experiences can fuel year-round marketing. I'm your host, Marie-Elaine Lemire. Joining us today are Liz Urheim, CMO at Verifone, a leading payment and commerce company, and Courtney Engel, VP of Development and Strategy at Magnet Media, a content agency focused on storytelling, strategy, production, and distribution. Together, they've been collaborating on content strategies around major industry events like NRF, using live events as a driver for storytelling, visibility, and long-term business impact. In this episode, we'll get into how brands should think about pre-event strategy, capture plans, executive content, post-event distribution, and what it takes to make events work as a part of a broader marketing system. Let's get into it. Liz and Courtney, thank you for being here and welcome to SIGHTLINE Live. Before we get into frameworks and strategy, I'd love to start with the story behind this. And I'll start with you, Liz. Can you share a bit about how your partnership between Verifone and Magnet Media came together?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And it's a pleasure to be here. The story actually starts well before Verifone. I formerly worked for IBM, which worked with Magnet Media. They did so much great work around interviewing customers at Davos and other events. And Magnet's leader at the time was still the leader, Megan Cunningham. She and I met because she did such great work, and I knew I was moving on and moving to the next. I wanted to take great agencies with me. And so when we talked, we really clicked over storytelling, over making sure there was great content with human connection, and the sorts of things that really connects and stays with audiences. And so fast forward to Verifone, I think it was in my second week, I gave Courtney a call and I thought, oh my gosh, I need some help. This company did a lot of tactical execution, but really nothing around storytelling. The way that the marketing organization grew up really didn't have sort of a central function with brand and product marketing and content and web and any of that. So it was a big build, and I asked both Megan and Courtney to come and help us build something, and they did it. It's been great ever since.
Amazing. And as a CMO, how has your view of events evolved from what they were to what they need to be today?
Well, I think I remember when there was a time when events were all about scans and booth setup and meetings and tagging and a lot of demos with very small font and a lot of what and how. There a lot of things focused on just, product. But fast forward over time, and honestly, not just that, if you had a speaking slot, a lot of times I had executives who were kind of talking at the audience. So those are fuzzy memories, because I think it's been some time since back then. But the whole thing about events is you can't think of them as a physical in-person only. For me, they are full experiences, and they always have to be digital first. I think of them as market moments, and they only work if you combine a number of things. The first is you got to realize that an event has scale. There might be 1,000 people who come to your booth or your experience. There might be 30 or 50 or 100,000 people at the event, much larger than who comes to visit you. But the entire world knows if there's an industry event, and they're looking for you as a market leader to have a point of view. They want to understand, what do you have to say? And so you have to think about events as scale. You have to think about them as digital first, because you're going to do pre-event, during event, and post-event. And you're facing an audience who, for the most part, the vast majority aren't physically with you at the event. So you have to have those voices and points of views that are out there. They're localized, they're relevant, they're building engagement, they're delivering delight and surprise, not just at the event, but if you're a digital participant and sort of tuning into, the news of the day. And you want to have really clear things to give your audience to do. So calls to action, engagement points. You want to tell them, kind of new stories. So bringing new innovation or partnerships or client stories. And you want to make sure that you're bringing your brand promise. It's not enough to be a one and done. It's got to be an event or a market moment. It has to be a story in a series of drum beats over time that, make your, brand feel trusted and true.
And I'm really excited about this conversation. As you mentioned, storytelling is such an art, and it's very exciting to have you both today. Courtney, you are on the front lines of creating content with Magnet Media. When did it click for you that most brands are underutilizing events?
Well, first, Liz is absolutely correct. These are market moments. And even before I was at Magnet, I was actually at Gray Advertising back in the day, circa 2008 to 2018. And my background's actually in earned media. And so at Gray, we were producing activations. We were the Gray activation and PR team. So you would think about this, right? Like we're building large events for a Canon, for a Marriott. And we were kind of at the forefront of thinking about earned media being at that table to think about how do we extend the content of what you're producing, to have a PR headline, to have content capture. And it was really so rare back then. Now we shoot to 2026. And for some reason, content is still an afterthought at these events. And I always used to fight for PR to be at the table. Like, don't come up with an event unless you've really thought about end to end what the story is. And for some reason, it's still that way where we became all integrated agencies. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And we're now at this place that we're just thinking about, let's do an event, let's be at a conference. But the storytelling, the drumbeat that Liz talks about is so important. And that's why I love working with her, because she does think like that integrated marketer that thinks about what was the story pre, during, and post and connecting the dots between them.
It seems like thinking about events as a system is a really important piece of our work these days. And we always talk about like the 365-day strategy. So Liz, I want to know, at what point does an event stop being worth it if it's not connected to a broader marketing strategy?
That is a very good question. And I've lived this. I've lived this in my previous world. I've lived it here, whereby, especially in a sales-led growth company, you got a lot of muscle memory where people are just doing tactics, right? And the sellers are saying, gosh, we have to be there. There are all sorts of networking opportunities. I got to be there, for to make a presence, et cetera. But what they don't understand is you really are not going to get the impact. You just certainly won't. You need the full 360-degree marketing and comms effort. You also need to make sure you're aligning to your ICPs. I'm sure Courtney's experienced this, where you go to an event and it's a complete mismatch with your content and your offers because you don't have the right audience there. You're not thinking through, okay, who's going to be physically there in front of you, or the broader notion of it's not just physical, it's digital. So you don't want the wrong audiences, the wrong messages, and you're just not going to get the results. I don't like to do them at all if they're not aligned. It depends what sort of relationship I have with the CEO and if I can say that outright. Typically what I'll do is I'll let one or so slide just to go and experience it, but very, very quickly do everything we can to make it so that it's a storytelling pre, during, post, properly digital first, properly understood, what's going to be delightful and make an impact and actually carry people from, the event or the digital experience into your, next call to action.
Any CMO recommendations for brands that have an event team that works on event and a content team that works separately, and the sales team has a CMO? How do you ensure that everybody works together to make sure that it's all integrated? Because what we see often is that the event team has a plan, they call the sales team when they need them, but then nothing is really fully integrated. It's like, as you mentioned, everybody's kind of doing their own task.
I've lived in a world where the event team was separate from content. I've lived where it's together with content, but separate from, let's call it, the field marketing organization, which tends to be closer to sales. And it's, there are ditches on both sides of the road, no matter how you do it. I think the way to do it is think of this and, as an integrated experience, as something that is, if you're going to tie to a business outcome, it's the entire lot. It's not the event itself. It's not the piece of content. It's not the social. It's not your, press release. You can have KPIs for those things, but when you're actually talking to the business, including the sales team, you're talking about outcomes, objectives, audiences. And when you do that, you get them to think about what's the objective overall. You go all the way to the place where, you tie it from kind of the outcomes back in, then you think about the different pieces together. So I think it's actually how you architect and choreograph, putting them, right from the get-go. So it doesn't feel like piece parts from different team members put together. It feels like it's this holistic market moment that's conceived right from the outset as being something that's, whole, and that the whole is greater than the parts.
We may call you back to the full masterclass on this. But Courtney, I want to talk about the content agency side. So for you, if you strip away the stage, the booth, and production, what is the actual job an event is supposed to do from a content perspective?
So B2B is a little bit different than B2C, excuse me. Although we love to say B2H, B to human, because we're all humans. And at these events, we are interacting with other people. We are networking. But on the B2B side, this is really to help the sales team ultimately. This is to open doors. This is to make their jobs easier at these conferences and events. So if you are giving them a piece of content that they can send ahead of time, it is an invitation to come. If you can give them a piece of content that explains what you do to shorten their elevator pitch, you've done a great job. If you can give them a tool to ask their clients to participate in content at the event, you just booked them. You just gave them a reason to be there. If you have content of pull-aside interviews and executive thought leadership that produced from the event, you now have a sales enablement piece that you can send afterwards. So there is something about that through line of content, making it more exciting, making it more engaging, something more easily to digest. That's on the B2B side. On the B2C side, these events are experiences to participate in. And there is something when you are there that you're immersed. It's wonderful, but there's FOMO that needs to happen in order for them to be successful. So at a B2C event, if you are not creating FOMO, that image, that photo takeaway, that video, you have not done your job right as a marketer. And what's so interesting is that I'm seeing this FOMO really come through on the B2B side now too. If you weren't at Advertising Week, if you weren't at Davos, you all know it now because we're all posting on LinkedIn. And so we have created this FOMO world now for marketers as well to build your own personal brand. We're seeing it every day with executive generated content that employees feel like they need to show up at Social Media Week and Advertising Week and prove that they were there. So I think content does so many things at these events now. It's for the sales teams. It's for you as a personal brand. And it has to be connected throughout.
And this is something we hear so much about these days, how the B2C approach bring in the B2B space. It's so interesting, and I'm excited that we can speak to that a little later, also about the executive generated content. But I know you both work together on NRF. So Liz, you've been collaborating with Magnet, producing content for Verifone, and NRF is a strong example of that work. The idea was to go to NRF already known and not just present. So what does that change in how you plan the work?
So exactly right. And now we've worked with Magnet for both years at NRF. So we're building over time sort of the connected piece. But absolutely, you want to be starting early. You want to reflect on past successes and past best-in-class examples, right? So there's plenty to be inspired by both B2B and B2C. As you point out, B2C tends to be, sort of at the bleeding edge. And there's a lot to be learning. But we spend a lot of time brainstorming on what great looks like and how that bar moves. And you want to be building on what you have and extending it. And again, you always want to be digital first. You always want to be aligned to delighting, the notion of FOMO. I love that, because you want to delight people. And if you're not there, you want to have a sense of, okay, I missed maybe the in-person delight, but I'm going to catch the digital after the fact delight. And always want to be aligning, again, back to what's the next story of your business and your brand, and that flywheel between the business, or I should say the brand and the products, what you sell, your products and services. So all of that has to be thought through, very carefully in advance. And it's never about, the physical moment once in time. It's about every sort of a connection point you can make on a journey, getting there while you're there, and then, on as a connection point to the next.
And if I'm not wrong, you created a brand and team video ahead of NRF. Courtney, I'd like to hear you on that. What were you trying to establish before anyone even hit the floor?
Yeah, so brand anthems are an incredible opportunity to tell the why, to give kind of this energy around a brand, to feature their executives. It was at a time where Liz had joined and there was a new wave of executives over at Verifone. So we wanted to feature them. The beauty of doing it right before an event allows a brand to have some cost efficiencies too, because you need that piece of content. You need that video. It explains so much about your mission, your goals. Lots of times now, a lot of our brand anthems touch upon your policies on AI and the future and innovation. And so you want that asset out there. Doing it before an event and a market moment like NRF allows you to have that invitation to your booth to tell people you're there. And what Verifone did a really beautiful job of is the build out of that space had a screen that allowed for that to be played on loop. So that executive visibility was front and center when you walked into the space. So you were seeing Liz on screen, and then you're meeting Liz in person. That connective tissue is so important for people to feel like, I know that person, I know that executive, and I'm going to go meet them. And I think that allows the humanity of this, right? Because we are oftentimes, and pre-COVID, like, we weren't meeting in person. We were just on email. We were just on Zoom. So it is taking the camera and connecting the video to the actual human in real life. So the cost efficiencies of doing an asset like that before an event is fantastic. But then it's utilized months and months afterwards as well. So it really becomes an evergreen asset.
So true. But Liz, how do you decide the level of ambition for something like a brand anthem? What makes it worth doing?
So you have to be prepared, right? Because as Courtney says, it's an evergreen asset. It was critical we did that as a precursor to NRF, so the major market moment. But we had to have, first of all, we had to have the right positioning, right? We have to, which obviously you want to be differentiated. It has to ring true to people. It has to align to what you sell. So sort of the brand positioning and the payoff of products and services, basically value exchange. You've got that flywheel. You need that. You need the kind of why now and why us. The human element Courtney talked about is so incredibly important. It's powerful. You can have lots of content that are, descriptors of value. You could have use cases of value. You could have other humans, which was also fantastic with partners and customers. But when it's your leadership, you got to make sure that you are living and breathing with authentic voices that are coming and saying, look, this is who we are. This is what we stand for. You do want those compelling proof points to go along with it. And then you need the creative platform. If you don't have a creative platform and you're building this asset and you don't have the tone, the tenor, the positioning, the voice, how you surround one piece of asset and how you build it to make sure that it's on brand and will ring true, then you're just not going to get the legs. And to Courtney's point, actually, we did this asset certainly as a brand anthem anyway, but did it prior to NRF, so we physically had it on the big screens on loop. But much to my shouldn't say surprise, but every single other, we have about 25 market moments. Most of them have an in-person, let's say 90% of them have an in-person component to them with screens and storytelling. So all around the globe, they all picked it up. It was, had closed captioning at the bottom with local subtitles, but every single one of those events picked it up. Whether, us as the leadership team were physically on the ground for those market moments or not, it was just the hero piece that was always played. And it was always played because it told the story in the right creative, thematic, and the, humanistic way.
You both mentioned the importance and value of the executive leadership to be involved. LinkedIn became a distribution engine in this strategy at NRF. So how intentional are you about using executive and brand channels to shape event demand before the actual event?
So we did do that. We did it better the second time, I will say, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But we absolutely, first of all, we're in the process of, building executive eminence for not just our CEO, but some of the, the leaders who are eminent in their field, either in technology or in other business domains. When we did it, it was sort of a first of a kind for Verifone. So we used the anthem video with the leadership team as I'll call it a start, an introduction for some of them, especially with their voices, and we built upon that. So let's fast forward a year later. We did a next edition with a lot of the same folks and some new ones. We were in a much better position to leverage LinkedIn and sort of the equity we built. And then finally, we've now sort of order of operations. I needed, the brand positioning, the creative platform. We needed points of view. We needed a proper web presence. We needed some good product marketing so that it could tie to the brand promise. And now we're adding proper communications, so a real communications function that will do a lot better, and complete job of having a full drumbeat of executive voices that, that is established, well beyond the series of events.
If we want content and events to be fully integrated, the planning is so important. And Courtney, from your perspective, in an event like NRF, for example, what does an ideal capture plan look like versus just filming at the booth?
So important. We talked about the brand anthem. We also did some animated pieces with Liz pre-event that showcased around. Liz is a master of leveraging every inch of an event to showcase content to make it easier for you to sell for her marketers. That's the pre-content. When you're shooting at an event, there's so many little things to think about. If you are trying to capture clients and do a point and shoot interview series one day, perhaps you don't do the day that has the most foot traffic. Think about a day that is a little bit quieter. If you want to have a podcast that is produced, perhaps there's actually a build out of that podcast studio. And we're seeing a lot more of that, where people are using their event spaces to create serialized content and becomes the studio. So there is a way to build out the space to organically be ready for content. So you do have to think about all of those little logistics. In an ideal world, I said this at the beginning of our chat, everyone should be at the table to think about these things, because not everyone is thinking about that sound quality. Not everyone is thinking about the lighting or when people are going to be walking by. So if that's the direction you're heading, you really want to have a holistic plan from the beginning. It can't just be that you show up and point and shoot.
And we often talk about how events can become content engines for a year-round strategy. But realistically, how long should an event live in marketing after the event actually ends? If it's done properly, can we really use content throughout the year? What's the lifeline?
That steady drumbeat should continue for months and months. If you are doing it correctly, first off, the algorithm now is wild, right? Like you're seeing a post on LinkedIn from 3 weeks ago. So never date your posts anymore. Don't say yesterday. Don't say that you were last week you were at an event. I mean, sure, it's fine to do that to some extent, but it should feel new. So when you're thinking about your content, it doesn't have to be a recap of an event all the time. These are insights that you're going to be getting from some of your best customers, your best executives, and that should be able to live on forever and ever as long as your strategy and your narrative and the foundational elements Liz said are still intact. So you can capture content now that is evergreen from events that can always live on. There's also something to be said about looking back. So if you're coming up to Cannes next year and you want to look back at the content you pulled at Cannes last year, if that piece of asset worked really well for you, it'll work really well for you that next year too. So you have to look at the metrics and data of what content worked for you, and you can recut and repurpose. We talked about the brand anthem. We've filmed a lot of executives for that piece. We call those like a super cut, right? There's multiple executives. But we could do singular cut downs for each executive too. So your content should be an arsenal of assets. It should be the bigger hero image and the hero video, but then there should be individual cut downs for each of your different executives. Think about this as a library now. Brands should really be thinking about sustaining everything that they've captured and how to keep re-leveraging, because again, it should continue to have that drumbeat and that noise and still work really hard for you months after.
This is so insightful. Liz, where does it get artists to connect event content back to pipeline or real business results? And what gets in the way?
So just a quick reflection, because Courtney said it so well about, transcending the moment with stories. I mean, you talked about, having a tremendous amount of shelf life and, more snippets and derivative assets that can carry you through. It's really about stories or chapters in a book. It's about people or characters, and it's about your plot, your drama, with having it feel fresh and new every single time. But it is a continuum, right? It's that library or that series of stories, a series of books. Then when you're thinking about, okay, let's take that and drive it back to real business results and what gets in the way, it's a comment I made earlier, which is thinking about content in a silo, and event execution in a silo, in an auxiliary event in a silo, in your communications with executive comms and external comms and internal comms. These are, you can KPI and measure each one of those. When you want to do a business outcome, it has to be the collection of them all. And when you collect them all, it is the pre, during, post, and it's top and middle and bottom of funnel. You have to do all of that together. And there are different pieces of content. There's different pieces of digital activation. There's different pieces of your event that you're going to light up depending on where you are in that, call it customer journey. And so if you do it right, the outcomes, you should have along the journey, be able to look at the outcomes that tie to business. And you got to measure it over time, because obviously you want to attribute the touches that you make maybe earlier in the funnel and in the buying cycle, and you're going to continue on and nurture those in various different ways. And so you need the holistic view, and you need the continuum.
And you just mentioned the importance of thinking about the chapters and the characters to build your story. But what does it, because I feel like we're always talking about storytelling, but the question that I feel many marketers would like to ask is, what does it mean to have a story worth telling in the context of an event versus just a collection of assets? How do you determine what's the story that's worth it?
Yes, well, for me, it's again going back to, frankly, it's going back to basics. Like, who's going to be at the event? What objectives do you have? It depends, right? If it's a very sales-led organization, if it's a very product-led organization, you're going to do different things where you are with different ilks of customers. You can do something hyper focused and precise if you use a sort of an account-based marketing approach. So you segment and subsegment your different audiences based on where they are in the journey with you, based on, how well they know you, and you're gonna think about the, not just the outcomes, but then the journeys and the content that feed into that. Because it's almost the more precise you make it, the more relevant you can make the content and more impactful. So you have to be thinking, not overdo it, right? Your ICP, the holy grail of just one person. You can do that. You can almost do that digitally or do it. But at an event, you're thinking about buying groups and you're thinking about, kind of clusters of different types of customers, and they're going to react to different things depending on their profile. So again, back to basics of, is the story worth telling? Well, to what story and to whom? It all has to ladder up to the brand and what you stand for. It all has to come down to some exchange of value in products and services, but that's going to mean different things to different people.
And Courtney, since you're involved in that process when you're helping brands shape their story, do you have any specific principle you use to make sure that it holds together?
Yeah, the principle is revisit the strategy every time. So to Liz's point, strategies shift, narratives change. So we do a lot of strategic sprints, 4 to 6 weeks leading up to some of these events. You don't want to walk into Cannes with a story that you told last year if it's no longer the story or if the market totally shifted. So think about who those personas are. Who are the right people that you should be talking to? What's the story for them? Tailor them to the various audiences that are necessary, and really think through that through line. So to automatically assume that the strategy has stayed the same, that's really the principle that you have to relook at what you were shaping and what you were telling. I go back to what we did at Advertising Week now 2 years ago with Perion, and we built out a game show for them. We used the space as a content studio for them, because they needed brand awareness at the time. That might be different where a brand is now. So every year it evolves. So you have to think about where you are in your journey, where you are in the funnel, and what you need to hit upon, because I think that really does dictate the activation. It dictates the story, the content capture needs. It all is so dependent on where you are in your journey.
Totally. Couldn't agree more. Before we get into our lighting round, I want to ask one question, and I want to ask it to both of you. So for brands with limited budget and evolving tools like AI, we could do a 3-hour conversation about AI and content, right? But how should they think about investing in event content today? And where do you think marketers need to be most careful?
Yeah. I can start. Certainly event content is really interesting because that's in person. That's real. That's human. You need a crew. You need someone to actually capture those interviews or pull aside interviews with your executives and your partners. Where AI is exciting is all of the tools leading up to and afterwards. And we're testing and learning all the time with project management tools, with sound effects, with translations, with transcriptions and editing. So lean into all the tools, but certainly invest in that thought leadership, because I think your executives at the end of the day, they're really going to put your story out there, as well as third-party endorsements from your clients.
It's becoming so competitive, the content out there. Liz, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, my reflection on this is really go back to basics, right? Know thyself. What's your TAM, your SAM, your SAMs, your SOMs? Who are your buyers? What do they care about? What business are you in, and what gives you permission to win? It's going to be different for different subsegments of your audience, and you got to do it at a granular enough level that it holds true and it's compelling. And you got to think of the full funnel again, upper, middle, and lower. And I think, to me, those are the basics. And you layer AI into a proper workflow where you're really clear and lean on getting the work done. And you're really clear and lean on what the client journey is. So to me, AI is this, superpower on top of all of that, but it makes the basics that much more important because there's going to be a lot of content and a lot of AI goodness, maybe, too much of it. And so you got to know what's going to land. And so to me, it's back to the basics.
I love that you mentioned that AI is a tool. It's really helpful, but it's important to think about the basics. Really insightful. Thank you both. I want to go to our lighting round. So there's no overthinking. I'm going to give you 2 choices of answer and you both tell me what's your preference here. Ready? Pre-event hype or post-event content?
It's a tough one, but I'm doing pre-event hype.
Both promote and maintain.
Make people stop or make people stay?
Stay. Stopping is easy, but staying is where you did a good job.
You got to have them stay. Yeah.
Polished production or raw authenticity?
It's raw authenticity for me.
It's authentic with production value.
I wasn't expecting the same answer for this one. One flagship event or multiple smaller ones?
This one depends on the business. It really, you got to pick which one's more impactful. And if you've got a much more federated, global, or different sets of product lines, you got to do it local or distributed. If not, if you got it, that it's much more, let's call it 60 to 80%, all the same, then you do it global.
I agree. I'd also say in an ideal world, I love quarterly tentpole events. It just maintains that noise and momentum throughout the year.
I love that. Both answers are super insightful. Planned content or spontaneous capture?
100% planned. Spontaneous just leads to disaster.
So I'm with Courtney. I'm a planner. I love planned. And you can be super creative. You get the right thought partners in, and it's going to be better than anything you come up with, one person or a couple people come up with on the spot.
I feel sometimes we confuse the authenticity and the spontaneous capture and the planning of it. So how can you plan content while keeping the authenticity that we talked about?
It's having a run of show. It's knowing what an ideal storyboard looks like. It's knowing the ideal talking points that you want to pull, but you should know what that frame is going to look like, the types of people that are a win if you pull them aside and you get that content. So yes, life happens. You might pull someone interesting that you didn't plan on having a great conversation with, and that's a happy surprise. But the plan should be in place. Knowing what you're editing should be in place. That has to be something that is thought about beforehand.
And content that drives reach or content that drives revenue?
For me, it, again, depends on the business, but in B2B tech, I have a strong opinion that content should drive reach. What should drive revenue is the content that's really in your product.
Yeah, I think it's really hard sometimes to think about direct correlation with revenue. And so I think reach is important, and also engagement now. It's not as much about how many likes you have. It's how are people responding to that? Are they reposting it? Are they talking on your channel about it? The back and forth conversations between CMOs on LinkedIn, I find fascinating. And we're going to see a lot more of that.
I'm super excited to continue producing content now. I feel I got so many tools out of these conversations. Thank you so much to both. I have one last question for you, and I'd love to get both of your answers. So what's one thing you hope brands stop doing after listening to this conversation?
Random acts of execution. It's just sort of the sum of everything. You need the plan. Know thyself, right? Know who you are and what will move people in your different ICPs and subsegments. Make it so pre, during, and post. Have it be very digital. Have it be storytelling that transcends one event or market moment so that you're building over time. Have it tied to, your brand promise all the way down to the products and services you sell. That is not a random walk. That takes planning. That takes, lots of revisiting of strategy, as Courtney said earlier. And, the random acts will make you feel good for just a moment. And then you're not going to be building towards anything. You won't get the ROI.
Courtney?
I hope brands stop treating content as an afterthought. Don't spend half your budget on an event for second half and not think about the content until afterwards. Really let them have a seat at the table. Think about it holistically, because this is like a place that is just ripe and rich with so much marketing materials from your executives to your partners.
Thank you both so much for such an honest and insightful conversation. I'm really grateful I had the chance to have you on the SIGHTLINE Live podcast. Where can we see you next?
Next in person, I'm here in Florida, in St. Petersburg, Florida, for our Petro conference this week. And then coming soon, we have a whole series of things, but our biggest next one is NRF Europe in Paris in September.
Amazing. Courtney?
Well, I just wrapped up Possible. Next, I have to look at the content calendar, but it sounds like we have a lot going on in Cannes. I'll obviously be at Advertising Week. I'm the biggest fan of y'all out there. And Brand Week, everything that comes about. I hope to be at a lot of conferences this year and keep learning and growing and absorbing from all the other brands and what they're doing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, both.
Thank you.
Thank you.